The wrought iron gates of Cypress Grove groaned in protest as Ellie guided the SUV onto the long shell driveway. Spanish moss, thick as cobwebs, draped from the live oaks lining the route, giving the impression of entering a green cathedral. She glanced at her mother, Clara, in the passenger seat, forcing a bright smile. Pretty, right? Clara managed a weak smile in return, her face still etched with the grief of losing her mother, Ellie's grandmother, just weeks ago. It is grand. The word felt insufficient, a pale echo of the weight of history pressing down on them. Ellie navigated the winding drive, the tires crunching on the oyster shells. Cypress Grove wasn't just a house, it was a legacy, a burden, and now, hers. Nana Evelyn had left it to her, the youngest generation, with a single enigmatic instruction. Understand what happened here, Eleanor, truly understand. Nana always loved this view, Ellie said, gesturing towards the grand façade, emerging from the trees. Said it was like a scene from a novel. The plantation house, built in 1848, was a classic example of antebellum architecture. White columns rose to support a wide veranda, overlooking meticulously maintained gardens. It was picturesque, the kind of place that whispered stories of mint juleps and waltzing, a romanticized vision of a bygone era. It was also built on a foundation of something far darker. It needs work, of course, Ellie continued, putting the car in park, but it is structurally sound. Nana kept it up beautifully, even if she was a little eccentric. She didn't elaborate. Clara didn't ask. Nana Evelyn had been a force of nature, fiercely independent and often distant. Let's start with the public rooms, Ellie said, retrieving the keys. I've already had the housekeeper, Mrs. Dubois, open things up. She's been with the family for, well, forever. The front door, a massive oak affair, opened into a cool, dim foyer. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight filtering through the tall windows. The air smelled of beeswax polish and something older, something musty and indefinable. This is the entrance hall, Ellie announced, her voice echoing slightly. Original marble floor, Venetian plaster walls. Nana had them restored a few years ago. She led Clara through the parlor, pointing out the antique furniture, the portraits of stern-faced Calhoun ancestors, the elaborate crystal chandelier. She rattled off facts, dates, lineage, the carefully curated narrative Nana Evelyn had always presented. The Calhouns were prominent figures in the parish, Ellie explained, involved in politics, shipping, very influential. She led them through the formal dining room, capable of seating 20, then into the library, lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. She pointed out first editions, historical maps, and a collection of Civil War memorabilia. Nana was a history buff, obviously. It is impressive, Clara murmured, trailing her hand along a mahogany table. She stopped before a portrait of a woman with piercing blue eyes. Who is this? That is Eliza Calhoun, Ellie replied. Great-grandmother. She was known for being a bit of a rebel. Apparently, she ran a secret school for enslaved people during the war. The narrative shifted here. Ellie's voice, losing some of its practiced lilt. Nana Evelyn rarely spoke of Eliza Calhoun, and when she did, it was with a strange mixture of respect and disapproval. As they moved deeper into the house, the atmosphere began to change. The air grew colder, heavier. They reached the oldest section, the original core of the house, dating back to the early 19th century. The ceilings lower. A sense of unease settled over Ellie, a prickling on her skin. This is the winter parlor, she said, her voice sounding strangely small. It wasn't used much, even when Nana was alive. The room was sparsely furnished, with a faded velvet sofa and a single ornate mirror. Ellie felt an inexplicable chill, a sensation of being watched. It wasn't the cold of the house, it was something else, something wrong. She shivered, pulling her cardigan tighter around her. "Are you all right, dear?" Clara asked, her brow furrowed with concern. "Just a little cold," Ellie lied. She didn't want to admit how profoundly unsettling the room felt. As she walked towards the fireplace, the floorboards groaned beneath her feet, a mournful sound. The room felt like it was holding its breath. "We should probably head back to the kitchen," Ellie said quickly, ushering Clara towards the door. Mrs. Dubois made some tea. Later, over lukewarm tea and stale biscuits in the modernized kitchen, Mr. Hemmings arrived, a retired school teacher with an encyclopedic knowledge of the parish and its families. Nana Evelyn had relied on him for everything from verifying dates to authenticating antiques. He was a fixture at Cypress Grove. "My condolences again, Mrs. Calhoun," he said to Clara, his voice soft. Evelyn was a character, a true guardian of local history. "Thank you, Mr. Hemmings," Clara replied, her voice still thick with grief. "And you, Miss Eleanor," he turned to Ellie. "I trust you'll continue your grandmother's work in preserving this magnificent estate." "I'll do my best," Ellie said, forcing a smile. Mr. Hemmings took a sip of his tea, his eyes scanning the room. "The Calhouns, they're a complex family. A lot of secrets buried within these walls. If you ask me," Ellie stiffened. "Secrets," he chuckled, a dry rasping sound. "Every old family has them, my dear. The Calhouns, perhaps, more than most. They built their fortune on the land, naturally, but there were other ways they prospered. Less savory ones." He didn't elaborate, and Ellie didn't press him. Nana Evelyn had always been fiercely protective of the family's reputation, dismissing any talk of impropriety as gossip, but Mr. Hemmings' words lingered, stirring a sense of unease. "I was helping Nana catalogue some of the estate records last year," Ellie said, changing the subject, "and I noticed some discrepancies in the original blueprints." Mr. Hemmings raised an eyebrow. "Discrepancies?" "Yes. The blueprints show a 10-bedroom house, but some of the old land surveys suggest there was a wing that was never included in the official plans. It is like it just vanished." Clara looked bewildered. "A whole wing? That is impossible." "I know. It sounds strange," Ellie said, "but I've seen the documents. The surveys are dated 1852, right after the main house was completed. They clearly depict a sizable structure attached to the west side, with at least 4 rooms. But it is not on any of the later blueprints, and there is no trace of it physically." Mr. Hemmings drummed his fingers on the table. "Interesting. Very interesting. The Calhouns were known to alter records when it suited their purposes, sometimes for tax reasons. Sometimes." He trailed off, his gaze distant. He suggested Ellie check the county archives. There might be some mention of it in the deeds or correspondence. "It is a long shot, but worth a look." After Mr. Hemmings left, Ellie excused herself, needing to escape the stifling atmosphere of the kitchen. She headed back to the library, drawn by a strange compulsion. She wanted to find something, anything, that would explain the unsettling feeling that had settled over her. She began to wander the bookshelves, running her fingers along the spines. The library was vast, filled with volumes on history, literature, philosophy, and arcane subjects. Nana Evelyn had been a voracious reader, and the collection reflected her eclectic interests. She pulled a large, leather-bound book from a high shelf. It was a first edition of a local history, published in 1905. As she carried it to a nearby table, a smaller, thinner volume slipped from between its pages and landed with a soft thud on the floor. It was an antique diary, its cover brittle and faded. The pages were yellowed with age, the ink brown and delicate. She carefully opened it, her heart beating faster. The handwriting was old-fashioned, elegant but hurried. The name scrawled on the first page sent a chill down her spine. Eliza Calhoun. She started reading, but something felt off. disjointed. They spoke of parties, of social calls, of the mundane details of plantation life. But interspersed among these entries were unsettling phrases, cryptic allusions to the hidden place and the price of silence. As she flipped through the pages, a folded piece of parchment fell out. It was a map, meticulously hand-drawn in faded ink. Ellie spread it out on the table. It wasn't a map of the plantation as it existed now. It showed Cypress Grove, but with a clearly delineated structure extending from the west wing, a structure that matched the dimensions of the missing wing from the blueprints. Within this extension, a single room was highlighted, marked with a small, cryptic symbol, sign a stylized eye within a triangle. But the room wasn't there. Ellie knew every inch of Cypress Grove. There was no room at that location. The wall was solid. She had walked along that very wall just hours ago. The room didn't exist. A sudden draft snaked through the library, extinguishing the nearby lamp. Ellie jumped, dropping the map. When she fumbled for her phone's flashlight and aimed it at the table, she noticed something else. A small, almost invisible inscription on the back of the map, written in the same delicate handwriting as the diary entries. Beware the weight of history. Some doors are best left unopened. The beam of her flashlight trembled in her hand. A cold dread washed over her. She wasn't just uncovering the past, she was stumbling into something dangerous, something hidden for a reason, and she had a terrifying feeling that Nana Evelyn had known exactly what she was doing when she left Cypress Grove to her, and tasked her with understanding what had happened here. The map felt like a brand on Ellie's skin, the faded ink a permanent stain on her curiosity. Sleep offered no escape, haunted by the image of the impossible room and the warning etched on its reverse. She was up before dawn, fueled by black coffee and a restless need to understand. She started with the structure itself, pacing the west wing of Cypress Grove with the map spread in her hands. The scale was surprisingly accurate, depicting the wing's dimensions perfectly. But where the map showed a substantial room, there was only a solid stretch of wall, constructed of the same aged brick as the rest of the house. She tapped the wall, listening for any hollow sound. Nothing. She measured, comparing the map's dimensions to the physical space. The room, if it existed, would have been roughly 15 by 20 feet, a significant space to simply vanish, looking for something dear. Ellie whirled around. Mrs. DeWitt, the current owner of the surrounding land and a long-time fixture in the local community, stood in the doorway, her expression a mixture of curiosity and disapproval. She was a woman built like an oak, with a formidable presence and eyes that missed nothing. Just familiarizing myself with the house, Ellie said, quickly folding the map. Nana Evelyn left me the estate, and I'm trying to get a feel for everything. Mrs. DeWitt's gaze landed on the folded parchment. Old maps can be misleading. This house has been renovated several times over the years. Things change. I understand that, Ellie said carefully, but I was looking at some old land surveys, and they seem to indicate. Land surveys are often inaccurate, Mrs. DeWitt interrupted, her voice firm. There is a lot of folklore surrounding Cypress Grove. People like to embellish, to create stories. Don't put too much stock in old tales. Ellie bristled. I'm not talking about tales. DeWitt. I'm talking about documented evidence. Evidence can be interpreted in many ways, Mrs. DeWitt countered, her tone dismissive. Believe me, I've dealt with enough genealogists and historians over the years. They all come here with their theories, looking for something that isn't there. She paused, her eyes narrowing. This house is perfectly well accounted for. Everything is as it should be. The veiled warning was unmistakable. Ellie forced a smile. Of course, I just thought I'd ask. Mrs. DeWitt gave a curt nod and turned to leave. Don't bother digging up ghosts, Miss Eleanor. Some things are best left undisturbed. Ellie watched her go, a knot of frustration tightening in her chest. Mrs. DeWitt's dismissiveness felt deliberate, almost protective. It only deepened her resolve to uncover the truth. Later that afternoon, Ellie turned her attention to the basement. The original section of the house had a stone foundation, damp and cool even in the summer heat. As she explored the labyrinthine passages, she noticed something peculiar. The stonework along the west wall, the wall corresponding to the hidden room on the map, wasn't consistent with the rest of the foundation. The stones were more recently laid, the mortar a different color. It was as if someone had deliberately patched a section of the wall, concealing something beneath. She ran her hands along the stones, feeling for any irregularities. They were expertly fitted together, almost seamless. "Mrs. Dubois," she called out, locating the housekeeper tending to the laundry room. "Do you know if any work was ever done on the basement foundation in the west wing?" Mrs. Dubois, a woman of few words, paused her folding. "Not that I know of, child. Not in my 30 years here. Mr. Calhoun Shine, your Nana's husband Tirvin. He did some repairs on the north wall after a flood, but never anything on the west side." Ellie thanked her and continued her exploration, her mind racing. The stonework was definitely a recent addition, a clear attempt to conceal something. But what? She spent the evening at the local library, poring over old newspapers and historical records. She was searching for any mention of renovations or alterations to Cypress Grove, anything that might explain the concealed stonework. She found nothing. Then she stumbled upon a faded article from 1857, detailing the disappearance of a slave named Samuel, who had worked as a carpenter at Cypress Grove. The article mentioned rumors of Samuel discovering a hidden passage within the house, a passage that led to a place where secrets were kept. The rumors were dismissed as the wild speculation of frightened slaves, but they resonated with Ellie. The article also included a brief mention of Samuel's skill as a stonemason, a detail that sent a chill down her spine. Could he have been the one to build the concealed doorway? And what secrets was he trying to uncover? The librarian, an elderly woman named Miss Abigail, noticed Ellie's interest. That Samuel's disappearance was always a sad story, she said, her voice a low murmur. Very skilled with his hands. Some folks believe he ran away, but others claim he met with foul play. The Calhouns were particular about their privacy back then. "Did anyone ever search for him?" Ellie asked. "Oh yes," Miss Abigail replied. "But the plantation was vast, and the swamps were treacherous. They never found a trace. Some say his ghost still wanders the grounds, searching for a way out." Ellie shivered, despite herself. The line between history and folklore was blurring, and she wasn't sure she liked it. That night, fueled by caffeine and a growing sense of urgency, Ellie returned to the basement. She carried a small toolkit, a flashlight, and the hand-drawn map. She focused on the section of stonework she had identified earlier. Examining it with meticulous care, she ran her fingers along the seams between the stones, searching for any sign of a mechanism, a release, a hidden latch. After hours of fruitless searching, she was about to give up when she noticed a barely perceptible indentation on one of the stones, hidden beneath a layer of grime. It was small, almost invisible, shaped like a keyhole. Except there was no keyhole. It was a pressure point. Taking a deep breath, she pressed firmly on the stone. A faint click echoed through the basement, followed by a grinding sound. A section of the wall groaned and slowly began to slide inwards, revealing a dark, narrow passage. Dust billowed out, choking Ellie. The air smelled stale, ancient, and undeniably wrong. She shone her flashlight into the passage, revealing a cramped space, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. The walls were rough, hewn stone, damp with moisture. It stretched into darkness, the beam of her flashlight unable to penetrate the gloom. She hesitated, a wave of apprehension washing over her. Mrs. DeWitt's warning echoed in her ears. Some things are best left undisturbed. But the map, the missing room, Samuel's disappearance. It all pointed to something hidden, something significant. Taking a deep breath, Ellie stepped into the passage, the stone wall closing silently behind her. The darkness enveloped her, complete and absolute. She was alone, swallowed by the secrets of Cypress Grove, with no idea what lay ahead, or whether she would ever find her way back. The passage was colder than Ellie anticipated, the stone walls radiating a bone, chilling dampness. Each step echoed strangely, amplified in the confined space. It wasn't a tunnel, not exactly, more like a crudely constructed shaft running behind the original exterior wall, sealed off for decades, perhaps centuries. Dust motes danced in the beam of her flashlight, a swirling vortex of decay. After what felt like an eternity, the passage opened into a small, square room. It was surprisingly intact, considering its hidden location. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and something else, something metallic like old blood. Ellie swept the flashlight beam across the room, taking in the details. It was furnished with antique pieces, Saul writing desk, a worn armchair, a tall boy dresser, Favi covered in a thick layer of dust. A single, barred window, too small to climb through, offered a sliver of moonlight. This was the room from the map, the impossible room. She cautiously entered, her heart hammering against her ribs. The floorboards creaked under her weight, a warning protest. She ran her hand along the surface of the desk, dislodging a cloud of dust. Beneath it, she found a stack of leather-bound journals, their pages brittle with age. She opened the top journal, her hands trembling slightly. The handwriting was elegant, precise, but the content was anything but. It was a record of transactions, meticulously detailing the sale and purchase of enslaved people, not from distant plantations, but from further south, from regions where the slave trade was technically illegal. The Calhoun family wasn't just benefiting from slavery, they were actively involved in its illicit continuation. Ellie's stomach churned. She quickly flipped through the journals, confirming her worst fears. Names, dates, amounts of money exchanged. Each entry was a damning indictment of the family she thought she was starting to understand. This wasn't the romanticized history Nana Evelyn had presented. This was a brutal, calculated exploitation of human beings. Alongside the journals, she found a collection of slave records, finger bills of sale, inventories, and correspondence. These weren't official plantation records, the kind that would have been open to scrutiny. These were hidden, deliberately concealed. One document, a handwritten list, catalogued enslaved people by name and assigned a monetary value to each individual. A woman named Lucinda, listed as strong breeder, was valued higher than a young man named Joseph, described as restless. A wave of nausea washed over Ellie. The blatant inhumanity was sickening. She stumbled back, knocking over a small porcelain doll that shattered on the floor. The sound echoed in the confined space, startling her. As she sifted through the debris, she discovered another journal, smaller and more personal than the others. This one wasn't a ledger of transactions. It was a diary, written by a woman named Seraphina Calhoun, the wife of a Calhoun plantation owner from the mid-9th century. Seraphina's entries painted a disturbing picture. She spoke of her husband's business ventures with a veiled disapproval, but also with a chilling acceptance. She wrote of the moral compromises she made to maintain her comfortable life. The diary also mentioned a keeper, a trusted individual responsible for maintaining the hidden room and its secrets. The keeper's name was never explicitly mentioned, only referred to by a single initial, J. Ellie murmured, replaying the name in her mind. Could it be a clue? The diary entries grew increasingly erratic, filled with paranoia and guilt. Seraphina spoke of being watched, of hearing strange noises in the house, of a growing sense of dread. Her final entry, abruptly cut short, mentioned a reckoning and a price to be paid. Ellie closed the diary, her hands shaking. The room felt different now, colder, more oppressive. She had the distinct sensation of not being alone. It wasn't a rational feeling. The room was sealed, hidden, but the sense of being watched persisted, prickling at the back of her neck. She scanned the room, her flashlight beam darting across the walls, the furniture, the barred window. Nothing. But the feeling remained, stubbornly refusing to dissipate. She tried to convince herself it was her imagination, a product of her heightened state of anxiety. She continued her search, cautiously examining the furniture. In the bottom drawer of the tall boy dresser, hidden beneath a pile of moth-eaten linens, she found it. A metal box, small and rectangular, its surface rusted with age. It was securely locked with a heavy antique padlock. Ellie's pulse quickened. This was it. She felt it in her bones. Whatever secrets the Calhouns had been so desperate to protect were contained within this box. She rummaged through her toolkit, searching for a lockpick. She wasn't a professional, but she'd watched enough crime dramas to have a basic understanding of the technique. She carefully inserted the pick into the lock and began to manipulate it, her fingers clumsy with tension. The lock was surprisingly stubborn. She worked for several minutes, sweat beading on her forehead, before she felt a faint click. The padlock sprang open. Her heart pounding, she slowly opened the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a single object, a tarnished silver locket. As she reached for it, a sound from outside the hidden door stopped her cold. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps. Someone was walking across the basement floor, heading towards the wall that concealed the hidden room. Her breath caught in her throat. She extinguished her flashlight, plunging the room into darkness. The footsteps grew louder, closer. She was trapped. Darkness pressed in, suffocating. Ellie's breath hitched in her throat, each inhale a shallow, panicked rasp. The footsteps outside the hidden door stopped. A moment of agonizing silence, stretched, taut and brittle, before a voice, cold and clipped, sliced through the stillness. Eleanor. It was Mrs. DeWitt. Ellie instinctively pressed herself against the wall, clutching the open metal box to her chest. She hadn't realized how much sound her own heartbeat could make. "I know you're in there, Eleanor. I heard the noise." Mrs. DeWitt's voice wasn't yelling. It was controlled, menacingly so. "Come out, now." Ellie didn't move. She fumbled for her phone, adrenaline coursing through her veins, but remembered there was no signal down here. She was completely cut off. Inside the box, illuminated by the faint moonlight filtering through the barred window, lay a collection of letters, carefully tied together with a faded ribbon and a single sepia-toned photograph. She risked a glance at the photo. It depicted a young boy, no older than 5, with a shock of dark hair and piercing blue eyes. His skin was a warm, golden-brown chiton, a clear indication of mixed heritage. He was dressed in ragged clothes, but his gaze was direct, intelligent, and held a hint of defiance. She carefully unfolded one of the letters. It was addressed to a Samuel and signed with the initial C. Serafina Calhoun. The letter spoke of a forbidden love, a secret child, and a desperate attempt to secure his future. "My dearest Samuel, I can no longer bear the weight of this deception. Our boy deserves a life free from the shadows. Robert Sivin, my husband, suspects nothing, but I fear it is only a matter of time. I have arranged for passage on a ship heading north, to a place where he will be safe. I pray this is enough. Forgive me for what I have done, and please protect our son." The boy in the photograph, Samuel's son, a child born of a relationship between a Calhoun and an enslaved woman. The truth was far more disturbing than she had imagined. This wasn't just about illegal slave trading. It was about the deliberate erasure of a lineage, a family ripped apart by the hypocrisy of the Calhouns. Eleanor, I'm giving you one last chance. Come out now, and we can forget this ever happened." Mrs. DeWitt's voice held a steely edge. Ellie knew that wasn't an offer. It was a threat. She slipped the photograph and the letters back into the box, determined to protect the evidence. Mrs. DeWitt was clearly aware of the hidden room, and she was prepared to go to any lengths to keep its secrets buried. Suddenly, the wall shuddered. The disguised doorway began to slide open, revealing Mrs. DeWitt, her face contorted with anger. She wasn't alone. A burly man, a farmhand Ellie recognized from the surrounding fields, stood behind her, blocking the exit. "I should have known you'd be poking around where you don't belong," Mrs. DeWitt snarled. "The Calhouns have a reputation to protect. Some things are better left in the past." "This isn't about reputation," Ellie retorted, clutching the metal box tighter. "It is about truth, about acknowledging the horrors of the past." "Truth is a luxury we can't afford," Mrs. DeWitt snapped. "Now, give me that box." She lunged for it, but Ellie sidestepped her, narrowly avoiding the grab. A scuffle ensued, a desperate struggle in the cramped confines of the hidden room. Ellie wasn't a fighter, but she was fueled by adrenaline and a righteous fury. Mrs. DeWitt was surprisingly strong, her grip like iron. She managed to wrench the box from Ellie's hands, but Ellie refused to let go. They wrestled for control, knocking over the furniture, sending dust and debris flying. "Give it to me," Mrs. DeWitt shouted, her face red with rage. "No," Ellie yelled back, determined to protect the evidence. As they grappled, Ellie caught a glimpse of the farmhand moving towards her, his expression menacing. She braced for a blow, but it never came. A voice, calm and authoritative, cut through the chaos. "Enough." Hemmings stood in the doorway, a shotgun cradled in his arms. His presence was unexpected, disarming. "Mildred," he said, his voice laced with disapproval. "What do you think you're doing?" Mrs. DeWitt froze, her face paling. The farmhand instinctively backed away. "This doesn't concern you, Arthur," she stammered. "On the contrary, it concerns me very much," Mr. Hemmings replied, his gaze unwavering. He lowered the shotgun slightly, but his stance remained firm. "I've known about this room for a long time, Mildred, and I've known about the reasons it was hidden." He turned to Ellie, his expression softening. "Are you all right, Miss Eleanor?" "I think so," Ellie managed, still reeling from the confrontation. "Let's get you out of here," Mr. Hemmings said, guiding her towards the passage. "Mildred and I will have a little chat." As they navigated the narrow passage, Mr. Hemmings spoke, his voice low and grave. "The keeper," he said, "the one mentioned in the journals, that was my great-grandfather, Jedediah Hemmings." Ellie stopped dead in her tracks. "Your great-grandfather? He was entrusted with maintaining this room, with protecting the Calhoun secrets. It was a shameful duty, one he carried until his dying day. My family has lived under the shadow of this secret for generations." He paused, his eyes filled with a mixture of regret and resignation. "The Calhouns weren't just slave owners, Miss Eleanor. They were manipulators, liars, and they weren't afraid to use anyone. Even my family, Thordine, to protect their legacy. And it appears," he added grimly, "that legacy still has teeth." The old Hemmings family homestead, a modest farmhouse a few miles from Cypress Grove, smelled of wood smoke and beeswax. Mr. Hemmings had insisted they continue their conversation away from the plantation, away from the watchful eyes of Mrs. DeWitt. The house felt safe, lived in, a stark contrast to the oppressive grandeur of Cypress Grove. "For generations," Mr. Hemmings began, settling into a worn armchair, "my family served as the keepers of the Calhoun secrets. Jedediah, my great-grandfather, was the one who built the hidden room on the direct orders of Robert Calhoun himself. He was a skilled stonemason, highly trusted. Robert Calhoun exploited that trust. He gestured to a collection of faded photographs and documents spread across the kitchen table. Jedediah wasn't told the full extent of their activities. He believed he was simply creating a secure space for personal documents. But as time went on, he began to uncover the truth. The illegal slave trading, the manipulation of records, the intimidation tactics. He realized he was complicit in something truly evil. But why didn't he expose them? Ellie asked, her voice barely a whisper. Mr. Hemmings sighed. Robert Calhoun was a powerful man. He had influence over the entire parish. Jedediah feared for his family's safety. He was told in no uncertain terms that any attempt to reveal the truth would have dire consequences. He chose silence, a silence that haunted his family for generations. They pieced together the evidence, sifting through the documents Ellie had recovered from the hidden room. The journals, the slave records, the letters, Udi. They painted a grim portrait of the Calhoun family's ruthlessness. Robert Calhoun hadn't just participated in the slave trade, he had actively sought to profit from it, acquiring enslaved people from distant states, bypassing legal restrictions, and selling them at exorbitant prices. He used intimidation and bribery to silence anyone who threatened to expose him. Mr. Hemmings explained, pointing to a series of coded entries in one of the journals. Local officials, law enforcement, even members of the church. He controlled everything. The most heartbreaking discovery came with the deciphering of a particularly cryptic entry in Seraphina Calhoun's diary. It revealed the fate of the biracial child, Samuel's son. His name was Elias. To conceal the scandal, Robert Calhoun had him sold to a remote plantation in Louisiana, severing all ties and erasing his existence from the family history. They didn't even allow Seraphina to say goodbye, Mr. Hemmings said, his voice heavy with sorrow. She was devastated, consumed by guilt. That is when she started writing in code, leaving clues for someone, anyone, to uncover the truth. It is monstrous. It is, Mr. Hemmings agreed. And the worst part is, this isn't just history. It is a legacy that has shaped this town for generations. The Calhouns built this community, funded the schools, donated to the church. Their name is synonymous with philanthropy and respectability, but it was all built on a foundation of lies and exploitation. Did anyone else know? Ellie asked. A few, but they were silenced, either through threats or financial incentives. Mrs. DeWitt's family has been protectors of the Calhoun legacy for decades. They know everything. A chilling realization dawned on Ellie. Nana, Evelyn, she knew, didn't she? Mr. Hemmings nodded slowly. I believe she did. She spent years researching the Calhoun family history. She uncovered fragments of the truth, but she never put it all together. I suspect she was afraid the DeWitts likely made it clear what would happen if she pressed too hard. Ellie remembered her grandmother's cryptic warnings, her guarded silences, her almost desperate desire to maintain the facade of the noble Calhoun family. She always said Cypress Grove held secrets, Ellie murmured. She just didn't want to look. The weight of the past settled upon Ellie, crushing and suffocating. She had come to Cypress Grove seeking a connection to her family, but she had found something far darker, far more disturbing. What do we do now? Ellie asked, her voice trembling. Mr. Hemmings looked at her, his eyes filled with a quiet resolve. We reveal the truth. It won't be easy. The DeWitts will fight us every step of the way. There will be backlash, anger, disbelief. But we owe it to Elias, to Samuel, to all those who suffered. We owe it to this town to confront its past. But what about Mrs. DeWitt? Ellie said. She'll destroy anything that threatens her family. We'll deal with her, Mr. Hemmings said grimly. We'll present the evidence to the authorities, to the Historical Society. We'll let the truth speak for itself. They spent the rest of the day meticulously organizing the evidence, preparing for the inevitable fallout. As dusk settled, Ellie felt a sense of grim determination. She was ready to face whatever came next. But as she was leaving Mr. Hemming's farm, she checked her phone one last time. A new text message from an unknown number. Stop digging. Some stones are best left unturned. The threats had begun. She wasn't just unraveling the past anymore. She was disturbing someone who wanted it to stay buried, no matter the cost. And she knew with terrifying certainty that this was just the beginning. The town hall was packed, the air thick with anticipation and simmering resentment. Every seat was filled, and people stood along the walls, their faces a mixture of curiosity, anger, and apprehension. This wasn't a typical historic meeting. This was a reckoning. Ellie stood beside Mr. Hemmings at the front of the room, facing a sea of hostile faces. On one side sat Mrs. DeWitt, flanked by a group of her staunch supporters, prominent landowners, long-time residents, pillars of the community. Their expressions were icy, their disapproval radiating outwards like a palpable force. "We are here today," Mr. Hemmings began, his voice resonating with quiet authority, "to present evidence that challenges the accepted narrative of Cypress Grove and the Calhoun family's role in our town's history." He laid out their findings, methodically presenting the documents they had discovered. The journals, the slave records, the letters detailing the illegal slave trading operations. Ellie displayed the photograph of Elias, the biracial child whose existence had been deliberately erased. A hush fell over the room as the weight of the evidence began to sink in. "These documents," Mr. Hemmings continued, "prove that Robert Calhoun wasn't just a respected landowner. He was a criminal who profited from the suffering of others. He actively engaged in the illegal slave trade, manipulated the legal system, and silenced anyone who dared to oppose him." Mrs. DeWitt was the first to react. She rose to her feet, her face flushed with anger. "This is outrageous. This is nothing but a smear campaign, orchestrated by outsiders with a vendetta against the Calhoun family." "These aren't outsiders, Mildred," Mr. Hemmings retorted, his voice calm but firm. "Miss Eleanor Calhoun is a direct descendant of the family. She has come forward with this information willingly, driven by a desire for truth and justice. She has been manipulated," Mrs. DeWitt countered. "She is young, naive, and easily influenced by this meddling historian." A heated debate erupted, dividing the room into two factions. Supporters of the DeWitt family argued that the evidence was fabricated, that it was an attempt to tarnish the reputation of a founding family. They spoke of the Calhouns' contributions to the town, their philanthropy, their legacy of public service. "We cannot rewrite history based on a few dusty old documents," one man shouted from the back of the room. "This isn't about rewriting history. It is about telling the whole story," Ellie retorted, her voice ringing with conviction. "For too long, we've been blinded by a romanticized version of the past. We've ignored the suffering, the injustice, the exploitation that built this community." The debate raged for hours, accusations flying, voices rising in anger. Mr. Hemmings and Ellie stood their ground, tirelessly presenting their evidence, answering questions, and challenging the prevailing narrative. "We've always known the Calhouns were complex," one elderly woman offered hesitantly. "But I never imagined it was this bad." "It is worse," Mr. Hemmings said somberly. "The Calhoun family didn't just profit from slavery. They actively concealed their crimes, threatening anyone who dared to speak out. They built their empire on a foundation of lies and deceit." Finally, slowly, the tide began to turn. As more and more people examined the evidence, the cracks in the DeWitt's defense began to show. The slave records were too detailed, too precise to be fabricated. The letters were too personal, too heartfelt to be dismissed as mere propaganda. A local lawyer, known for his integrity, stood up and addressed the room. "I've reviewed the documents presented by Mr. Hemmings and Miss Calhoun. I find them to be credible and compelling. This evidence suggests a clear pattern of illegal activity, and a deliberate attempt to conceal it. His statement was a turning point. Others began to voice their support, acknowledging the need to confront the dark side of their town's history. Mrs. DeWitt, realizing she was losing control, launched a desperate attack against Ellie's credibility. She doesn't understand this community. She just inherited this house and thinks she can come in here and lecture us about our history. Ellie stared back at her, unflinching. I'm simply asking us to acknowledge the truth. The truth is painful, but it is necessary if we want to move forward. The Historical Society voted overwhelmingly to launch a full historical review of Cypress Grove and the Calhoun family's legacy. Plans were made to create a more accurate and inclusive portrayal of the plantation's past, acknowledging the suffering of the enslaved people who had built it. Mrs. DeWitt and her supporters stormed out of the room, vowing to fight the decision. But the momentum had shifted. The truth was out, and it couldn't be silenced. Exhausted but relieved, Ellie and Mr. Hemmings retreated to his farmhouse. The battle had been won, but the war wasn't over. You did well, Eleanor, Mr. Hemmings said, offering her a cup of tea. You were brave. It wasn't easy, Ellie admitted, but it was the right thing to do. Later that night, after Mr. Hemmings had retired for the evening, Ellie returned to the documents, wanting to examine them one last time. As she sifted through Seraphina Calhoun's journals, she stumbled upon a final entry. Tucked away at the very back of the book, it was written in a shaky hand, barely legible. He knows. Jedediah knows about the North Field, and the price of silence is far greater than he imagines. There is something else buried there, something Robert swore would never see the light of day, something unspeakable. The North Field, another secret, another layer of darkness hidden within the grounds of Cypress Grove. Ellie's blood ran cold. The illegal slave trading had been horrifying enough. What could be worse? What had Robert Calhoun buried in the North Field? She closed the journal, a sense of dread washing over her. The reckoning had begun, but she had a terrifying feeling that the true horrors of Cypress Grove was still waiting to be uncovered.